turning off the lights? That's weird. Oh,
That
works.
That works.
Hello and welcome. I'll just let everybody take their seats who are going to sit down. There's some seats up here in the front for those who are just coming in. I hope everyone's been having a good time so far. My name is Tess Chakkalakal. I'm a director of Africana Studies for now. I've just taken over from Professor Brian Purnell, and I'm here representing our wonderful program. Judith Castleberry's here. We have Deji Okudnake, who just joined our program this year. Unfortunately, he's at a conference in Williamsburg, but will be joining us later in the weekend. We hope we have an opportunity to meet all of you, all of our wonderful alum, and current students, of course, too, but especially our alum. It's so great to see you all again. I see so many familiar faces from over the years. I've been here since 2008, and I'm also looking forward to meeting those who I didn't know who were here before I got here. So welcome to all of you, and it's my great pleasure to open this session with one of my heroes, Dr. Nell Irvin Painter, who is Professor of History Emerita of Princeton University and author of 8 books and 2 editions, one, Narrative of the Life of Sojourner Truth, and Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Her most recent book is Old in Art School, a memoir of starting over, published in 2018 and finalist for the Book Critics Circle for Autobiography. Professor Painter has had a long and distinguished career as an author, teacher, and artist, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today to Bowdoin College. Thank you. So this is a pretty big forum here, but nonetheless, I'd like this to be a conversation, not only between Professor Painter and I, but also all of you, to give you all a chance to engage in this conversation. There are 2 microphones in the aisles, so when it's time to open it up for questions, and it won't be long, so get it ready, please use a microphone. There's all kinds of important reasons for why you should use the microphone, and I'm not going to rehearse them, but they're important. So I'd like us to just open this conversation with Professor Painter. If you could tell us about your experiences of African American studies at Princeton, elsewhere, and in your own life.
Yes. I started with African American studies not at the very, very beginning, which was in the Bay Area. I'm from the Bay Area, but I wasn't there then. At San Francisco State. And those first programs, departments came out of struggle. So in the very beginnings, it really was an activist undertaking. So maybe even more activist than scholarly. Very quickly, the scholarship came to the fore. For me personally, I got my PhD from Harvard in 1974. And in my career, I was always in history departments, but I always had an attachment to African American studies. I had another attachment to women's studies as well. But for African American studies, which we're talking about now, I want to say that people who, well, in those days, in the 80s and the 90s, it was very unusual for a faculty to have their appointments in African American studies. Everybody was always in a department. Mm-hmm. And that worked in one way, in the sense that if you were in a department, you got the scholarly cachet of the department. And certainly at Princeton, the history department was cachet-full. But also, African American studies, part of its strength, but also part of its weakness, was interdisciplinarity. Mm-hmm. So departments wanted to know what history you were writing or what literary criticism you were writing. And people in African American studies wanted to bring those together. And then there was also the question of place. Where is African American studies? Well, very quickly it became diasporic, which meant that maybe you were encroaching on African studies. And here's a little side bit I want to tell you about, that African studies, at least in the institutions where I was and knew, African studies was older than African American studies. And African studies was the playground of white men. And they were not interested in diasporic studies because African American studies was full of people looking like Huey Newton. So there was a real tension in who could do what, where. Mm-hmm. And that probably took 20 years to dissipate. In the early days, the scholarship came out of departments, and there was a lot of scholarship. Let's see, last spring, I think it was, I reviewed Skip Gates's book on Reconstruction and its aftermath for the Times Book Review. And it was a positive review. It had the pull quote, "Great book." Then they put in the book review, "Nell Painter says it's a great book." Yeah. So, take that to heart. If you're going to write a review, put a pull quote in if you like the book so they can use it. But at any rate, I did take Skip to task because he did something that is very common now. And that is when writing about a topic that's like a race topic or a black topic or an African American topic, to only use recent scholarship, which is very likely to be by white authors. And so the 30 years, the 40 years of scholarship when the rest of us were sort of toiling in the vineyards and not necessarily being considered as serious scholars, despite our Harvard PhDs, that because it's older work, because it's work by black authors, because it's work about black people, all of those are reasons why that work has had a harder road to hoe. Now that African American studies is more universal, shall I say, mm-hmm. and there are white scholars writing about it, they have the advantage of being recent work and being white scholars. But what African American studies did in all those years was put down layer after layer after layer after year after year after year of scholarship on African American topics. And that scholarship is what people stand on now. So for instance, everybody knows Ta-Nehisi Coates, terrific Ta-Nehisi Coates. What gave him the foundation was the scholarship from African American studies. So one big difference between now and 30, 40, 50 years ago is that 30, 40, 50 years ago, when terrible things happened, or things that we would want to talk about, we didn't have the visibility and the scholarly heft to make statements that could get through.
Right.
Now we have the disability and the scholarly heft to make statements that do get through.
It almost sounds like these layers of scholarship that you're talking about, it almost sounds like we have a canon for Africana studies.
Yes.
And what would constitute that canon? Are there some great books of Africana studies that you think all students should know, should read? I know that's a loaded term.
This is not an answer I cannot answer that in a disinterested fashion.
Right.
I will let you all go to your research librarians or whatever.
But like, one book, we have an introduction to Africana Studies class now in our major, and all majors have to take this class. And we've often debated amongst ourselves, should we all teach at least one book or two books that everybody should know? And so we've generally done, Professor Castleberry, you can throw some out here, but I think the two big books are Souls of Black Folk, Equiano's interesting narrative, and maybe Harriet Jacobs and Citizen. So that the development of a canon, do you think, is part of the project of Africana Studies?
Yes, but you've mentioned books that I would not necessarily have thought of. And that's because you're in a different field, and I have not been in the academy for a little while. There might be books that have come out since I've been in art school or in art that I just don't know about. So it depends on what purpose you want that. But why not do all one book one year and then 3 different books another year and other books another year? One great thing about youth is it just keeps coming.
So kind of, I remember Frederick Jameson had this phrase, it was a disposable canon. That's what he used. He,
that's kind of tough.
But he was a bit of a tough guy, but you know, you would just kind of recycle or change the canon as people saw fit.
Yeah, definitely. But the vicissitudes of publication, the history of the book, that has a lot with what you have access to. So the market plays a big role in what books you can put your hands on. For instance, I might think you should read a wonderful book that is no longer in print. That's just not going to work, no matter how wonderful the book is, because it's not in print. So the market does play its role. On-demand printing can help a lot. Technology can help a lot in the outreach that you can turn to. But I would never have thought of just one canon. However, I did a couple of times teach an introduction to African American studies at Princeton, and I was teaching, actually once I taught it with Cornell West, and of course I did all the work. But there's some gender politics for you. The personnel who fed into it were coming out of cultural studies. And this must have been in the 90s when cultural studies was all, and I, a historian, says, what's cultural studies? And I didn't know. But I learned really fast because the canon for that class, generated by my colleagues who were very much in cultural studies, was heavily cultural studies. Depends on time, place, and who.
So you mentioned that the origins or the roots of Africana Studies were kind of activist in nature.
Absolutely.
And now that it's become established with this layers of scholarship that you talked about, what's its reason for being now? It's not about resistance, it's not about breaking in, it's here now. So does it change, does its purpose, its objectives shift as a result of, how so?
I'll give you painters one rule of life in general. Things change. Things change. But we don't ask that of an English department. I mean, we ask an English department to change. That is happening right now. I think it's at Williams College.
Yeah, it's certainly happening at Williams.
So, things change, or they need to change. A history department still exists. They're not doing the same things they were doing 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And African American Studies has much more freedom now, and with departments also much more flexibility to respond to the various kinds of pressures or needs. So I don't expect an African American, like Princeton, I don't expect Princeton's now African American Studies department to function in the way it did when it was founded 50 years ago.
And although things change, but as much as much as things change, they also stay the same. And it sounds to me like one of the things that has remained a constant is the interdisciplinarity that you talked about as being almost like a founding principle of Africana Studies. And now it's like a buzzword, especially around here, that's a thing that we should all be doing. And yet in Africana Studies was doing it from the beginning.
Yeah. So probably by now, some people in Africana Studies maybe should be burrowing deeper into the disciplines, I don't know. But certainly I think of it as strength to be able to think more widely than whatever the discipline that you were trained in or that you're working in. It means that you're working twice or three times as hard, especially now since scholarship tends to be so specialized that you almost have to learn new vocabularies to cross your disciplinary fields. But it can be done, again, with the help of a good reference librarian.
So are we kind of teaching ourselves that? Or is that also the job of Africana Studies, to teach our students how to think and work interdisciplinarily?
Yes. Yes, it is our job, but we also can have help. We can help each other. So the great thing, I mean, you come from an English department, I come from a history department, and we can sit around and talk.
Right.
We have a mutual friend in literature who, I mean, I spoke to her yesterday before I came here. Her name is Thaddeus Davis. Maybe some of you know of her. And she wanted me to remind you that people who are within traditional departments can be very supportive and can make great contributions to interdisciplinary studies of African American studies. So it's not simply within the programs or the departments. And this was not something I had thought of until I spoke to her. So yeah, talk to your friends.
Talk to your friends and do work differently, do work better. One of the forms that Professor Painter operates in particularly is biography. And we talked a little bit about biography previously. Both Professor Casper and I are right now writing biographies.
Yes.
And biographies are kind of a form that is not as, not accepted, but respectable in some fields, let's say English.
Or history.
Right.
Or history, yeah.
So I wonder if there is something about that too, where Africana Studies becomes an area that allows you some kind of freedom, like you said, to do work. I mean, one of the things you said in our class earlier was, I did the work I did because it's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And people weren't telling me what kind of work I should be doing. And I think
They
that's
probably were telling me, but I wasn't listening.
or maybe you didn't have to listen?
Both, yeah.
So how, in writing the two biographies you wrote, did you have a method for writing those biographies that came out of history, that came out of Africana Studies? What informed that kind of biographical scholarship and its contribution to Africana Studies?
Well, just the fact that I could see two African American individuals. So outside of African American studies, particularly in the 20th century, it was hard just to see people because the world was full of canonical figures. And once you got past Du Bois and Douglass, you know, it was very hard to see other people. So many of the biographies of African American figures come out of African American studies because that's the place that said, oh, that's interesting, as opposed to just ignoring it. So that's the first thing, to see the importance of the subject, which is a big deal. The next thing is to respect the scholarly needs, to know that because you're dealing with an African American figure, you were going to have some challenges in terms of source material. But not to say, oh, you can't do that because there are no sources. How I experienced African American studies was, we'll find the sources. And so, you know, we did. But another thing that I think is central to African American studies and women's studies is to realize the biographical importance of figures who had been invisible before. That here are women who are important. here are Black people who are, just to say, this is worth writing about. That's a really big deal. It's a really big deal. And to pat you on the back for doing it, that's another big deal. The challenge, though, especially for African American studies, but I think this also exists in women's studies, is to want to make the biographical character somehow representative. We touched on this in our conversation in the class, that the biographer deals with someone who, for some reason, is exceptional, if only because that person has left traces in the historical record. But probably leaving traces in the historical record means that person has done something, or written something, or said something that stands out from the normal range of experience. So we want a Black woman biographical subject to be every Black woman. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work. Because on the one hand, it doesn't work because neither you nor I nor you nor you nor you is every Black woman. Each of us is our own person. The same goes for our biographical subjects.
So from biography, I wonder if we could go briefly to autobiography, yours in particular, and how you shifted out of this field into a new field, pursued a completely new career following your MFA, and now a working artist.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about that
Sure.
journey?
Okay. What Tess is talking about is a book I published last year, now in paperback. But I want you to buy the hardcover.
It's available in the bookstore.
Yeah, I think there are a few hardcovers left. And it's called Old in Art School, a memoir of starting over. Yeah, a memoir of starting over. Is that my phone or somebody else's phone? I thought I turned mine off.
I thought I turned mine off too.
Okay. So Old in Art School, a memoir of starting over. And I used the word old in the title, which is not done. Old is a word kind of like Black used to be. And so I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember when somebody called you Black. It was like, oh, those were fighting words. You know, it was an insult. And now, so I started that book maybe in 2006 or so, and people would say, oh, Nell, what are you working on? And I'd say, oh, Old in Art School. And they'd say, oh, you're not old, you're older. I said, no, I'm old. And actually, you're a pretty good group. I'm going to try something with you that I did in New York when my book first came out. So, I would say, I want to do for old like James Brown did for Black. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And everybody said, oh, yeah. And I'd say, but I want to say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. So I would say, can you do both those things? Can you do both those things? Yeah? Okay, so first you're going to say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. And then say it loud, first say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And then say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. Can you do that? Okay. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Did that feel good? Yeah. It's funny, white people love to do that. It's true. But here's the test. Say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. You are good. You are good. That is a hard one. So my mother actually inspired me with this. Her second book, she started writing books when she was 65, which was an inspiration. And her second book was a memoir called I Hope I Look That Good When I'm That Old. Because that's what people said to her. And they say it to me. They say it to me now. So, you know, I knew how to put the word old in a title. Mm-hmm. But more than anything, I'm like a crusader for old. Yay! Great, yeah. You know, I was 64 when I started my BFA. So, you know, I thought that was really old. But it turns out in art school, you're old at 30. And in life, if you're a woman, you're old at 40. Am I right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, the title works. The reason I wrote that book was because when I started going to Rutgers for my BFA, all my former friends and colleagues, they said, oh my God, I'd just love to do that. Oh, so exciting. The life, the artist, the creativity. Where's my scarf? Yeah, it was going to be so wonderful. Oh, tell us what it's like. So I kept notes. And after my editor turned the book down and I cried me a river and slit my wrist. Then I started again, and I did get an agent, and she helped me do the transition from scholarly writing to creative nonfiction and to write personally, which is really hard. Really, really hard. So I faced up to humiliations and also stupid things I had, not all of them, just some, a few, one of the stupid things I had done. And the book came out last year. People have asked me lots of questions. One was, why did you go to art school? And the answer is, because I wanted to and I could. Which is really hard for a woman to say. I wanted to and I could. It's got to have some larger, it was good for womankind. I forget the second question. Yeah.
So it was a difficult journey in art school?
Yes.
And you
Yes.
persevered,
Yes.
and you're glad you did?
No. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad I did. And I'll give you just one example. For those of you who are scholars, you'll really understand especially in African American studies. But it's true about writing history generally, that you write history about something that has a larger importance. So the question is, this person, this experience, this event, is it representative of something larger? Mm-hmm. That's the question in history. The question in art is, am I interested in this? It's not, is it true, or is it representative, or is it larger? It's just, do I want to do this or not? So I guess I was already an artist when I started, because I did what I wanted to do. So that's one difference. And the other difference is between the use of the archive in the two areas. For historians, the archive is something you really respect. You look for all the archives that are relevant to whatever you're studying, and you respect the archive. You don't pretend that there's stuff in there. You don't pretend that there's stuff that doesn't exist because you don't like it. You have to deal with it. There's a certain sense of truth, of archival truth. So as an artist, though, if there's something in my visual archive, or my discursive archive for that matter, that I don't like, I can just ignore it. And if there's something I wish was there, I can just make it up. So I experience art as fiction. Mm-hmm. I don't know how that sounds to someone in literature.
Sounds fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask one question about the art before we open it up, because since I'm sensing we're ready to open it up. The art itself, would you call the art, I mean, I've seen some of it online mostly, I haven't seen it up close, but would you call that African American art, given its subject matter, and how would you categorize the art that you produce now as an artist?
My art.
And you don't want to put any kind of label on it,
Well, if you
generically?
want to call it African American art, call it African American art.
All
if
right.
you don't. Right now at Harvard, I have two shows. One's in the Smith Center, and one's in the Center for Government and International Affairs. The one in the Smith Center is all self-portraits, because I just love to draw myself. And they're all different ones, you know, and the title of it is Freedom from Truth, for the self-portraits. And the curator used truth, knowing the resonance with the biography of Sojourner Truth. And then also I have spoken of making art as free, as freedom. And the other is a series of made-up maps I call the Black Sea Composite Maps that are part of a larger Odalisque Atlas project, which comes out of the Odalisque, the history of white people, white slavery. And these maps, in the center is a kind of thing called the Black Sea. It's entitled the Black Sea. But around it is the west coast of Africa, Turkey, Santo Domingo, Thailand, Russia, Ukraine. These are all slavery places where vulnerable young women were sold. That is the odalisque, the sexually vulnerable, beautiful young woman. So she's the odalisque figure. She's Harriet Jacobs, for instance. And right now I have a drawing at the Muscaral Museum at William and Mary, and it comes out of a piece I made, actually at Yale, of a bit of text from Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl that says, if God has given her beauty, it will prove her greatest curse.
All right.
And would a woman please ask the first question?
Don't make me call on you.
I want to thank you both for the symposium. I am a faculty member from Bates College in Africana.
Welcome.
So thank you. I appreciate being here. My question is, with you having done some really great work with women's biographies, enslaved women's biographies, and even coming from your artistic background, it makes me think about how we see enslaved women on screen, especially with Harriet Tubman's movie just recently coming out. And so I wanted to ask your opinion about what is it that you think that we're seeing, and what expectations are we bringing with us about what we see when we view enslaved women on screen?
Yes.
And what do you think about the movie in general?
I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, okay.
All I know about it is on my Facebook page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Lots of tension.
Yeah, and there's a good little bit, actually. So when it's a movie, it's a feature film. It's not history. So that's the first thing. And like we said in class today, that we need to know more. And if movies are a way to get people to know more, that's good. And I think it's really important that this movie, and it sounds like it's a good movie, that this movie it does the work of African American studies in the sense of adding knowledge to our world, which I think is a good thing. So unless it's a really horrible movie, you know, with rapes and, I mean, I'm sorry, I will not watch a movie in which a woman gets raped. I just won't. But, and even if it's supposed to be a really good movie, I won't. But if it's an entertaining movie that is an ethical portrayal even if it's fiction. I mean, it has to be fiction because it's another medium. That we need to respect the specificity of different mediums. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gotta get to the mic.
Okay, hello. My name is Journey. I'm a sophomore, and I'm not an art major, not really. I like art, but so I'm from New York, and there was this piece at, I think, the MoMA, and it's a painting of Emmett Till in a casket, or
Yes.
an artist's interpretation
Yes.
of Emmett Till in a casket.
Yes.
And the artist, a white woman, received a lot of
She
backlash
did.
for painting
Yes.
the picture. I
Yes.
would like to know, like, your thoughts about
I
art
do
like
have
that.
thoughts about that, actually.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
I know the painter, Dana Schutz, and I've actually seen the painting. I didn't see it in the biennial, but I saw it in her studio. As a painter, I like her painting. I liked her painting before I saw this painting. Not everybody likes her painting. In my memoir, I mentioned some curator who says, this is the worst, her painting is the worst painting in the world. So liking or not liking her kind of painting, the way she paints, that's a question of taste. But that's not what you're asking. So the painting, if you ask me, is a virtuoso painting. It's very well painted. That's also not what you ask. The controversy was about whether or not she had the right to paint Emmett Till in his casket. That's what you asked, right? Yeah. And it was a controversy. At least one young artist stood in front of the painting and said nobody could see it because it was profiting off Black people's pain. And this young person did something which I deeply resented, which was standing for all Black people and telling me what I could or could not see. That's a kind of abrogating of right that I don't agree with. But the second thing, and this is what I said publicly, was that Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till Mobley, made the decision to bring his body from Mississippi to have him displayed so that, as she said, the world could see what they did to my son. So the decision to make this image a public image was a decision that Emmett Till's mother made. So if Dana had gone behind something that had been protected, I think I would have responded differently. But I responded by saying she could paint that painting because Emmett Till's mother had already made the decision. So for me, that was an easier answer than the larger question of, does a white artist have a right to paint a Black thing? That I didn't get to. And I think, well, let me not try to answer it in the abstract, because then there's not an abstract answer. Thank you.
Okay. Professor Painter, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. You are such an inspiration to me, and I'm sure many people here. My name is Imani Height, class of 2020. And I served as the only Black visual arts major at this school.
Wow.
Actually, in my 3 years, there's only been another one who graduated my first year here. So for 3 years, I've been the only one.
Oh, poor you.
And I like to...
Really? No, that's tough.
It is, and I like to describe my artwork as very Black, and I'm very proud of it. But one thing that I have trouble with is critiques and the idea of explaining my artwork. I don't like going too in depth with explaining what my artwork means. And it seems that people also don't know how to critique my artwork as artwork. They see it as Black art. And I want to know, what advice would you give to me and any other Black artists on campus in regards to explaining your artwork, but not to the extent where you're making people feel comfortable, because that's not what I'm here for. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I hope you will be able to read Olin Art School, because I do deal with that specifically and at length.
Okay.
And I agree with you that it is hard to be the only black person in white stuff, because so many white people are so ignorant. And it's really exhausting, because you have to do so much teaching all the time. But you do have to do some teaching. And the personalities of your teachers will make a big difference. So if you have obstinate know-it-all teachers who won't be a help, that's really tough. If you have teachers who are willing to help, you might compile a little, this is where I go back to the reference librarian.
Yes.
A little library of African American histories, art histories. So in my book, I do talk about that. And I do talk about the burden of black artists, because art is supposed to be the work of the individual. This is the expression of your individual genius. But many African American people can't separate ourselves from the community.
Yes.
And if you want to say something about the community, about the history, about the culture, about something, then your teachers may say, oh, you can't do that, it's illustration. So I have a chapter on illustration, actually, that speaks to that. And it's part of the difficulty of dealing with African American art if you don't know any African American stuff or African American art history. That on the one hand, you want to have your art dealt with as your art, that is to say, in formal properties. And this is one recommendation I will make to you. When people look at your art, ask them, how are they responding to your mediums? How are they responding to your composition? How are they responding to your palette? How are they responding to your process? And when they get off into society and all that, you can stop them and say, well, I really want to talk about the formal qualities of my work at this point. That's one thing. I'll tell you what saved me: going somewhere else. I didn't leave art school, but I put my art in my little diesel station wagon, and I drove it from Providence down to New Haven, where I had people who would really look at it. So you need allies.
Yes. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Honestly, it is such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited for this
thank
weekend.
you.
My name is Jessica Spade. I'm currently a junior here. I'm an English theater major and Africana minor. And I personally have found that as sort of I guess I would call myself an artist, but I'm really interested in theater and playwriting.
That's art.
Yes, I think so. And I'm wondering, for me personally, and I want to know what sort of art does for you, because for me, I found that there is a piece of it that's sort of expression, whether I'm feeling really extremely happy one day or extremely sad one day, it allows me to express how I'm feeling. But also I found that there's sort of a deep healing that comes in creating art and writing about not only being a human, but being like a Black woman and having to sort of understand what that means in this world. And I'm wondering if, for you, like, what has art done for you, and has it offered any sort of healing for you in your lifetime?
Healing, no. Because I wasn't wounded. And you're not the first person to ask me that question. I think it's a question that goes with art. Because many people, I remember when I was an undergraduate at Mason Grove School of the Arts at Rutgers, there were people in my painting classes who were clearly using art to heal. So yeah, that's a respectable, well-known relationship. It's just not mine. I like to do art because I like to do art, and time goes by and I don't feel responsibilities to it. I remember when I first started with the Odalisque Atlas, and I was showing some of the maps, and I've forgotten who I was showing it to, and they said, well, what do you want us to see? But, you know, for me, it's not, if I wanted you to see it clearly, I would write it out. I wrote the book, so if you want to know, here, that's what you... So it's a kind of a freedom. You know, I think I used the word fiction, and that's how it feels to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name is Beatrice. I am a senior. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. My question is similar to an earlier one done by Journey. There is a movement currently going on with portraits in portrait galleries, whether putting if the person was a slave owner in their placard and in the description. Is that something that is frowned upon in your opinion, or is that some people would argue that there's no room for that in the art space?
Well, I would say, yeah, go ahead, do it. Yeah. The relationship between art and wealth is like that. And in this country, at this time, it's probably good to know about where money comes from. Maybe in another generation, you know, it'll fall out of fashion. It certainly wasn't fashionable before. So it's not a decision to be made once and for all. But for now, in this time, in the questions that we're asking, I'd say, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Just want to give everybody a moment before I thank Professor Painter for coming to Bowdoin and sharing her thoughts and life with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nell. Great.